I had a couple of comments before we start, and would just like to thank everyone for joining to hear a little bit more about our new indexes. This is an exciting improvement that we've created here at AGA, and certainly has been a labor of love. I think everyone would agree. It's taken us a minute to get here, but we're really excited that we've arrived and have an opportunity to share with you a little bit about how these indexes were developed, and maybe a little bit more information on those. Um, a few thank yous, I think, before we dive into it, that I think are absolutely necessary. These were not put together without a lot of thought and consideration by a lot of different people. Primarily our breed improvement committee. These folks have been working on these for a long time, a lot longer than I've been at Gelbvieh. These have been in the works. And so I just kind of wanted to read off the current breed improvement committee, just to let you know the people that have spent an inordinate amount of time digging into these indexes. Our breed improvement committee is chaired by David Larson. It's vice chaired by Hyatt Frobos. Has members Dustin Aheron, Sidney Wilkinson, Gary Felger, Dan Larson, Dan Warner, Kyle Cavalli, Blake Hoyer, Jerry Grund, Dustin Rippey, Brad Burke, Mark Hilton, and Bill Tucker. And they spent a lot of time, a lot of evenings on on Zoom calls like this, discussing these indexes, talking about what the ramifications potentially would be, and trying to get all the math correct and make sure we were using the right information, most up-to-date information, to put together the best selection tools for our commercial cattlemen that use our genetics, to help them select and to help them do a better job. So hats off to that crew that spent a lot of time on that. I'd also like to offer a special thank you. Sarah Mum's been here from the beginning on these, has spent a lot of evenings as well, putting together meetings and helping us get this underway, and has been very good about answering questions. And I think as we move forward, we'll be kind of a primary person that we'll want to reach out to kind of learn more about these. Megan Underwood helped us set up this meeting tonight, and so appreciate those two for working with us on that. And of course, Dr. Weber has been a lot of help as we put these together, and has done a ton of work, answered tons of questions, and do appreciate him being gracious enough to present us with this webinar, because I think we'll be able to use this moving forward to refer back to as a reference. So again, we're going to learn a little bit more about an exciting set of indexes. A couple of housekeeping things. We are recording this webinar. As I mentioned, we'll be posting this to the AGA website moving forward, so that we can all refer back to it if we need to, or if we have questions later. I do think that, if we do have questions moving forward, please reach out to Sarah or I. If we can't answer them, we'll certainly forward those to Dr. Weber, and he is the expert. If we could, I would ask that everyone put their screen or their Zoom call on mute as Dr. Weber gives his presentation. We do have a chat box. If you'd like to ask questions as we go along, please put those in the chat box. If you're like me, that's a safe bet, because I'll probably forget them before we get to the end of the presentation. But we have logged in some time at the end for you to ask Dr. Weber questions. So if you do have questions and jot them down, you'll have an opportunity to ask. So again, thank you everyone for joining, and we're excited to hear more about this. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Weber.
Great. Thanks, Harold and Sarah both, and Megan for getting all the legwork done, putting this together. I'm excited to share this development. As Harold mentioned, it's been a fair time coming. We've been working on new prototype indexes from very nearly the beginning of my time back working with the genetic evaluation and breed improvement systems here at Gelbvieh, which is, I think, going on pretty close to 5 years now. So it's been a long time in the works, and I'll explain a little bit of why it took a while as we go along here. But I think we're finally to a really good spot with three new relevant indexes that have been updated, and we'll talk through that. I'll get my share screen going here and see if that works. All right. Let me get rid of that. All right. Is that coming through okay, Harold and Sarah? Just black slide, intro, title slide. Okay, great. Excellent. So, title of the talk for today is New Genetic Improvement Tools for Gelbvieh Breeders. And for those of you plugged in, know last spring, kind of a early release on the feeder profit index revamp, but two additional indexes in play here this fall after the release of some additional data from IGS. So a bit of overview for today's talk. A real quick refresher on indexes to kind of set the stage, if you will, for both the approach that we undertook in development of these new indexes, but also some guidance on how to use these tools and understand them. Overview then on the three new indexes and their development, and just sort of measure of transparency, I guess. Some discussion about the economic pricing model that went into the index software. And then at the end, we're going to talk about four new EPDs that have been released in the AGA suite. Mature cow weight, cow energy requirement, dry matter intake, and dollar gain. Okay. So why do we need selection indexes? One of the mentors I had as a young student at Colorado State was a famous animal breeder named Rick Borden. And he and a number of colleagues put together a sort of seminal paper on constructing and utilizing and our motivation to develop selection indexes for our industry. And Rick says there are no easily accessible or objective ways for breeders, particularly breeders in the beef and sheep industries where ownership is diverse and production environments vary a great deal, to use these predictions, intelligently. And by predictions, he means EPDs, right? And so he was talking about the sort of stalemate we'd come to in the animal breeding community of not developing these implementation tools. And if you actually go back in the scientific literature, selection index actually came before EBVs, or expected estimated breeding values, or expected progeny differences, either one. And those tools were developed to fill in the architecture for selection index. The challenge was, as we got birth weight, weaning weight, yearling weight, milk EPD, and calving ease, we thought we were done. But that is not the case. So selection index provides us a convenient and effective architecture to manage multiple trait selection, which we all know as practitioners of animal breeding and genetics, a really difficult task. Certainly lots of EPDs to consider. It seems like today's a good example. We're going to pour four new ones into the mix. But sorting out then which ones are actually the important traits to select on given a particular production scenario is challenging. And many of us have used the seat of the pants approach for a long time to try and understand how we make improvement that affects not only our own profitability, but most certainly that of our commercial customers. And that can be a real challenge, in a good way to lose more hair and more sleep in the process of doing that. The challenges then really become, as we think about our segmented beef business, is how do we communicate value up and down the beef chain. So over on the right there, we've got an illustration of our segmented business with this question about how do we take information from further down the chain in production environments and integrate that back into sensible selection decisions that are appropriate in terms of which trade-offs we make in the economic decision making as we make improvement. And that's what the selection index is really ultimately designed to do. And it's important because we know that there's more than one trait that defines profitability in our business. And in fact, the traits differ depending on what your marketing endpoint is and your production scenario, particularly related to the retention of replacement females. So we have this really complex decision then that we need some help sorting out, and Selection Index provides a convenient way to do that. And it really boils down then the available information we have on a selection candidate into a single prediction value. And it's measured in dollars. And so it gives us a convenient measurement unit that we all understand to describe these economic differences across a range of traits for the candidates under consideration. Um, Most importantly here, it appropriately weights each of those traits for their influence on profit. Selection index, not a new idea. A graduate student at Iowa State back in the early 1940s actually proposed selection index as an architecture and an idea to select for a term that they called aggregate merit or net merit. And it was this contribution across a range of traits that influenced as Mike McNeil and others have described it, our satisfaction with a particular selection candidate. In a capitalistic society and profit-driven industry, dollars seem to be the most logical form of satisfaction measurement that we might deploy, and that's why we use economic weightings in our selection indexes. But in fact, we could use a number of other things. If you wanted to express the entire index on pounds of TDN or some other measurement, we could certainly do that through some mathematical transformation. Mike McNeil, who's also done lots and lots of work on selection indexes, says that selection index then is a formal statement of the trade-offs among traits used to evaluate selection candidates. And so as we think about, maybe a weaning endpoint, as we add 1 pound of weaning weight, what's that worth relative to maybe a 1 unit increase in calving ease direct? It turns out that computing the index isn't particularly complicated. It's simply a function of, as the bottom equation shows, a set of economic weights. Those are the A1, A2, A3 to AN, multiplied by their respective EPD. So once you've done that multiplication of the economic weight times or marginal economic value times the EPD, we just sum those up to create the index. The complicated part of this whole exercise then becomes determining what are the A's, what are the economic weights that we use to determine their contribution to profit. And we'll talk about how we go about that here in just a moment. So we are now to a point where we're obviously releasing these 3 new indexes. They're called Maternal Profit Index, Feeder Profit Index, and Total Profit Index. And they were precipitated by, or the release precipitated by the publication now on a routine basis of 2 important EPDs by IGS and that partnership. And those 2 EPDs are dry matter intake and mature cow weight. And we'll talk about why those are important. But without them, we were sort of had our hands tied a little bit to get particularly maternal profit and total profit rolled out because of the importance of mature weight EPD. So these 3 indexes then describe different kinds of production scenarios. So the maternal profit one is to a weaning endpoint. So the calves are sold at weaning time and replacement females retained from within the herd. This is a production scenario that describes roughly about 80% of the commercial cow-calf producers in the United States. The feeder profit index then is a terminal index. So this would be if I'm retaining ownership on those calves, so no replacements retained, and selling these steers and heifers then on a value-based marketing grid. That's the terminal. So no replacements kept here. The total profit index then is sort of the intersection of these 2 different systems. I call it a value chain wide index, or you may think about it as Simmental has a similar number. It's called the all-purpose index. And it is a system where replacements are retained, but all the cull animals are sold on a value-based marketing grid. So all the cull steers and heifers go through the feed yard, sold on a grid. This one actually probably is the least represent or has the smallest representation of producers in the business that actually do this. Somewhere, probably around maybe 10% or so of cow-calf producers retain ownership clear to the rail. Certainly with prices the way they are now, that's even a smaller number. But I like this one because it gives this sort of whole industry view of genetic improvement across the value chain, and helps us sort out the antagonisms that exist between carcass endpoints and maternal cow performance. Okay, so we get to see the impact of those antagonisms in this index. One of the key things is transparency of the way the index was created. So we use pricing data that spans, in most cases here, a 10-year time frame from 2015 to 2025. We use monthly reported data or weekly reported data, in some cases summarized with a mid-year split here, so that when we update the index on an annual basis and roll the whole thing forward a year, we're not doing that right in front of bull sale season in the spring. Okay. Um, the software that we use to develop the index is a product called iGenDec. This is a product developed through a set of USDA NIFA grants. It was led by Dr. Matt Spangler at the University of Nebraska. He and I and Bruce Golden, who did the software coding with former animal breeding faculty at Colorado State, excuse me, I slurred that, and the scientists at the Meat Animal Research Center were on this proposal to build out the grant, build out the product. And so this is an online tool. It's hosted by the Beef Improvement Federation, available on a subscription basis to industry participants. So it gets used in the classroom and teaching. It gets used by individual producers. It gets used by breed associations to build these generalized indexes, like we've done here today. And it'll do kind of traditional native beef selection strategies, but also has the component or the features to do a beef on dairy system. Okay. So if you want more information on iGenDec, if you just go to beefimprovement.org, the Research Center and iGenDec, or just Google BIF and iGenDec, and it'll take you right there. Okay, Dr. Google will get you to the place. So the commonality here in the scenarios that we've been working on for MPI, FPI, and TPI are the utilization of Gelbvieh balancer bulls mated to Angus cows that are 2 to 10 years of age. So iGenDec lets you completely customize the breeding scenario. So you can specify the breeds, breed compositions, age demographics of your cow herd, reproductive rate, cow size, calf performance, all kinds of stuff. And I'll show you a glimpse of the things that you can customize in the index here in just a minute. But we built these 3 indexes around the concept of aiding commercial cattlemen in making the best and most efficient and effective selection decision for Gelbvieh and balancer bulls on those Angus-based cows. Okay, so it is designed with the commercial cattlemen in mind. And to that end, it's not really, it's designed for Gelbvieh breeders, but as a tool for your commercial customers. Okay. And so it is not what is the, direction that Gelbvieh breeders need to undertake to change a range of traits in the Gelbvieh population. It's how do we select the existing Gelbvieh bull products and apply them in a commercial setting. That doesn't mean that these 3 indexes won't be useful to seed stock breeders. I know in my own personal experience, when I was faculty coordinator at the purebred beef unit, we use selection index frequently as both a screening tool for bulls coming into our system that we were going to use via artificial insemination or in embryo transfer programs, as a way to identify real high merit bulls across a range of traits. But we also used it as a tool to evaluate how we were doing in building products that met our customers' needs. Okay, and so the indexes can be very useful to seed stock producers, but you're not the principal target. Okay. So parameterization, again, we use pricing data that spans a rolling 10-year time frame. And this is actually a question that I get pretty frequently as well. Why didn't you pick the most recent 3 years? Well, one of the important reasons for that is that, as you all know, the generation interval of the beef cow is about 6 or 7 years, and the cattle cycle in the beef business is about a decade long. And so if we used, for instance, the last 3 years of pricing data to build our prediction model, and use that to produce calves that we're going to sell 2 or 3 years from now, we're likely selling those calves in a very different market space, right? Because we're basically, record high prices in the beef complex from end to end. If we parameterize the model that's forward looking, to use that kind of pricing information, we're going to make selection decisions where we're selling calves in the bottom part of the trough. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And in fact, this idea of using some kind of midpoint helps even that out and put us on a good trajectory to make a good decision. One of my mentors used to have a saying, you can't outbreed the market, right? With the idea that the market moves faster than the generation interval of beef cows. So we have to be a little bit careful on how we parameterize these models. Certainly, if somebody's interested in doing some forecasting and genetic improvement against a hypothesized market structure, you are certainly willing or able to license iGenDec and go do that. It is an interesting exercise. I've done a little bit of it, but my comfort level really is around using some historic price data because it gets the input outputs paired up, right? So our production system helps align those resources and pricing across the chain in a really efficient way. Okay. We do use publicly accessible sources of data. So we try and minimize all the black box components that we can. And so the data that we use to parameterize the model is publicly available, principally from USDA reported market or carcass pricing data. We also use the expected breed of sire mean performance data from the Meat Animal Research Center that's reported annually in Table 2 of that press release. And we also use the K-State Focus on Feedlot data. There is no other routinely reported data set of feedlot cattle or fed cattle performance information. And so we use the K-State Focus on Feedlot as a representative data set. Okay. I'm not going to go through every one of these on these slides because there's literally probably, I don't know, 5 or 6 dozen different parameter things that we could change in the model. I've kind of pulled out a snapshot of ones that I thought you might be interested in. Annual cow cost is a really important one in the model because it describes the input side, principally of particularly the cow-calf model and components in the system that really influence profitability at the cow-calf level. So we use this is the feed and variable costs on a per cow basis. USDA ERS 10-year average reported value of 602.53. Now, many of you are probably going, wow, I wish I could run cows for 602.53. I do too. And if you certainly look in the last 2 or 3 years of this ERS data, it's north of 800 somewhere. But again, we're using a 10-year time series. So we're using 10 years of input data and 10 years of pricing data to capture those relationships that exist between the inputs and the outputs. Okay. Backgrounding cost about $48 a month. These are for calves that are on a 2 pound a day growing ration. Backgrounding period 120 days. Focus on feedlot 177 days on feed. Feedlot cost is 13.5 cents a pound dry matter basis. Average daily gain about 355. Feed conversion about 6.2. Daily dry matter intake on a phenotypic scale here is 22, just over 22 pounds. Cost of gain about $95 a hundredweight. Okay. Some of the animal parameters here, hot carcass weights. We do use fairly heavy hot carcass weights, recognizing the trend in our business is to much heavier outweights. So 894 is the number. That comes with a ribeye area of 14 1/4, about 5/10 back fat, And marbling score here is a 533, which is equivalent to a small 33. So again, small 0 is the break point between choice and select. Okay. Calf birth weight's about 82 pounds, weaning weight 576. And yearling weight's about 838. So we closely check these to make sure all the animal performance metrics all line up so that the days on feed are appropriate. Da 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 da. Okay. Um, Feeder cattle pricing again. So 10-year average. The yellow box here is the currently applied 2025 numbers. I included the 2020 or the previous 10-year group, the 2014 to 2024 data here on the left, the contrast to those. So you can see just adding 1 year's data really did change these average prices quite a bit. And that's why we use the 10-year average, okay? Because otherwise these numbers would be dramatically different. And we know they're not going to be representative of the longer term trend if we don't do some normalization. Okay. The fed steers and heifers, 600-pound and heavier carcasses were at 220. Lightweight carcasses had a $20 discount. In this particular simulation model, there is no serial slaughter, so the cattle all die the same day. And because of that, we don't put any heavyweight discounts in the model, recognizing that in application, producers go through and top pens to avoid those heavy carcasses. So we don't have any heavy discount in this. Okay. And we're also recognizing that, in today's market, there's a number of places you can go where, the discounts applied, but only after you exceed plan average and all kinds of rigmarole. So we left that complexity out, but certainly recognize that heavy carcasses have a lot of value in our system. Okay. Here's the pricing grid for the carcasses. So yield grade 1 through 5 on the horizontal, and the quality grade in the vertical orientation here. So a prime yield grade 1 is up $29 a hundredweight. This information is actually pulled. It is on a shorter time series than the rest of the USDA reported data, because we wanted to capture, and Dustin Ahern on the committee, I need to tip a hat to him. We did a lot of work looking at the impact of the changing dynamic in demand structure in our business at the far end of the chain, and a little bit of thinking about how that impacts us longer run, and where we need to be positioned as a Gelbvieh population, and more emphasis on quality grade seemed to be like a reasonable approach to take. And so we did go in and use the most recent data available out of the USDA cattle contract library. So that's data from January of 2023, basically to present. And it did add about $7 or $8 to prime, and a little bit to the program cattle, to push the emphasis towards a little more quality grade in our system. It also did a little bit of shift in yield grade, but not as much. But we thought this was maybe more representative than particularly the current USDA 5-area reported pricing, and so forth. So this was kind of the consensus decision amongst the Breed Improvement Committee and the board on the set of numbers to use for the carcass merit grid. Okay, and I think this is a pretty reasonable and forward-looking approach. If you want to do a little familial promotion, if you want a really good contemporary look at the beef cattle market, there is my twin brother Dave's an economist, and he happened to be on a podcast called The Future of Beef here about a month ago. And they do a really nice job discussing some of the consumer and production dynamics that have led to this dramatic shift in demand in our business the last couple of years. And I think leads more credence even to this idea that we need to continue to focus on improvement in quality grade across a number of populations, including Gelbvieh. Okay. I want to talk a little bit about sort of the output now, what we get out of once we run the model. It is a computer-based simulation, runs up on a server in the cloud, and what it spits out is really two sets of information. One of those is a table that is called relative emphasis. We use a pie chart to display it. And basically it tells us what the big drivers are, what things move the grid, what are the economically important traits in that particular production scenario. Um, the importance here is the relative emphasis is not the weights that are applied to the index or to the EPDs in the index. Okay, it's just how much of the variation does this particular EPD describe, or variation in that EPD describe, and variation in the index. So if you're statistically inclined, this is equivalent to a partial R squareds. Okay, so it's what emphasis does this variable's variation have on the variation of the index. Okay, the other piece of information that comes out are the marginal economic weights or marginal economic values, the MEVs. And these are the, if you remember back in my initial equation, there was an A1, A2, A3. These are the A's, okay? These are the weights that we apply to the individual EPDs and then subsequently sum them all up. The products get summed up. And the meaning of these marginal economic values are then what is the change in net revenue or profit from a 1 unit change in the trait that's being weighted, okay? All other things held constant. So for example, if we add 1 pound of weaning weight, the marginal economic value for weaning weight tells us what is the influence of that 1 pound increase of weaning weight on profit. Okay, all other things constant. Okay, um, the MAVs then, as we compute them through these bioeconomic selection index models, then account for differences in the heritability of the trait, the genetic relationship between the traits. So, what is the relationship between birth weight and weaning weight, and how do those move together or not in selection via the genetic correlations that are modeled in the background for each of these traits in the index and production scenario. And then we measure then effectively their economic contribution to profit. Okay. And so we can derive these MEVs. One of the really key things is that they capture efficiency. Okay. They model then through the index the input output relationships and the ISO efficiencies that go with those. So one of the things that I check frequently, and we'll talk about dollar gain at the end, is the relationship between selection for improved growth versus improved or increased dry matter intake. So are we actually finding animals that do a better job converting intake into output? Okay. Um, so that's the MEVs or MEWs. Okay, so we'll set you up a little bit with 3 slides here, one for each of the indexes. This one's maternal profit index. So this is the 2025 version modeled against an Angus cow base. So again, calves are sold at weaning time, replacement heifers retained. Okay, and what this says then is that as we look over here in the pie chart, well, what are the big drivers? Well, mature weight is a big one, right? Because mature weight is a defined energy sink in the system, so it reflects differences in cost based on cow size and weight. Milk and weaning weight. Remember, milk EPD is not pounds of milk produced, it's pounds of weaning weight of the calf. Okay, so milk and weaning weight direct then describe differences in calf product, right? So those are 2 big drivers. Stayability is another important driver. Stayability is the probability the female stays in production in a system where they're called for reproductive failure. So stayability is important, right? Because we know the cows that last longer have less replacement requirements in the herd. So more cull heifers get sold into the marketing channel. So we decrease cost, increase revenue. So that one's important. Heifer pregs, the little skinny bar in between. It doesn't count for much in this index. Calving ease direct is kind of the Royals blue wedge, and then the orange one is maternal calving ease. Okay, so that's the relative emphasis. What are the big drivers in the index? Over on the left then are the marginal economic values for each of these traits. So weaning weight direct, every 1 pound increase in weaning weight EPD yields $1.17, almost 18 cents of additional profit. Okay, a pound of milk gets you 37 cents of improved profit. Okay, feed intake. So every pound of feed intake decreases revenue or profit by about a penny. So that one's not a big effect here. But if you take mature weight, it is, right? So every pound of mature weight of the cow decreases profit by 35 cents. That's recognizing the trade-off then between cow size and energy requirement. Okay. Stability, heifer preg, you can see those numbers. Every 1 unit increase in calving yeast direct gets you about $2.58. Okay. The next one here is set up the same way, so it's feeder profit index. So this is the terminal calf index system. No replacements retained. Not surprising. Different set of traits are important here, right? So we're going to look at in carcass value as the primary revenue stream. So not surprising, carcass weight and marbling are two big drivers in that. Fat and thickness plays a role from the yield grade standpoint and cost. Okay, dry matter intake, the principal measure of input costs into the system. So dry matter intake is measured on growing animals, so it plays a big role here. Um, Post-weaning average daily gain is important, and a little sliver of calving ease direct. Okay, you can see the economic weights there. I'll just point out a couple of here. Hot carcass weight, obviously, the principal driver of revenue stream. Every pound of carcass weight gets you $1.72 in profit. Marbling score, every full 1 unit marbling score increase nets about 70, almost $79 of additional revenue. So it has a big impact here. Feed intake, big minus, right? So that's the cost side of production. So a pound average, 1 pound increase per day of dry matter intake costs you almost $22. Okay. Let's see, total profit index. So this is the one where we sell calves on the rail, but keep replacement heifers. I think arguably the most complicated selection criteria of the three, but one that captures then the antagonisms between how are we trying to make the cows really productive and efficient and still build high value beef carcasses. So lots of traits included here. Really, it spans most of the traits in our suite of EPDs, but carcass weight and marbling, if I had to say there's two drivers for revenue in this index, those are them. Okay. Then, mature weight and dry matter intake are the big cost drivers. And about equal here, right? So they account for about the same amount of variation in the index at the end of the day. As you look through the economic weights, these are a little bit different than what we saw, say, in feeder profit index or in the weaned calf index. And it's just this balancing of the impact of 1 unit change, all other things held constant. Okay. And so you can't really directly compare these index values across indexes per se. They're within index and within production scenario. Okay. You'll see here marbling score is worth a lot more in this end calf index or total profit index. And part of the reason for that is we had less calves to sell at market, right? Because we kept the replacement heifers back. So the importance of those traits then in really driving revenue has gone up substantially. Okay. One of the things, and I again tip my hat to Dustin Aher, and he provided this suggestion as a way to look at the impact of the index or change in traits that are included in the index. And so I'll quickly orient you through this table to point out kind of how this aligns, if you will, with the relative emphasis tables. Okay. So what we did is we took breed average EPDs. I think this is, I can't remember, maybe non-parents or sires, it doesn't really matter. It's the breed average. And you'll look across the top and they're kind of in the order they spit out of iGendex. So hot carcass weight, ribeye fat, marbling, birth weight, weaning weight, maternal, yearling weight, feed intake, across the table. The second line then is what I call perturbed. That is what is the fifth percentile for each of those traits. Okay. So what we wanted to do is say, well, if we made an animal that was the best 5% for all of these traits, what would the index look like? And then what would be the source of variation within that index? Okay. And so if you look down, then the next block that's the middle of the colors, that's a breed average animal on these three indexes. So MPI, FPI, and TPI. And so each entry then represents the EPD times the marginal economic weight for that trait. And it's then contribution to the index. So these are the partial sums for the index construction. Okay. The bottom block then represents, well, what are those products of the marginal economic weight times the EPD for each of those three indexes. Okay. And so, for example, here, if we look at hot carcass weight in the TPI index, the breed average animal generates about $68.61 of the total $133 of index merit comes from hot carcass weight. Okay. If you go to the bottom, for the animal that's in the top 5% for hot carcass weight, that animal generates $111.49 of its $303 of index value. Okay, so these are just the partials that make up the individual components to go into that sum. Okay, the next one maybe is more helpful to you. These are what I call the deltas, or these are the differences between the top 5% and the breed average animal for each of the traits and each of the indexes. Okay, and so you can see where the value is coming from in that increased performance or merit. And maybe the simplest way to look at it is, well, what are the drivers? So that's the percentage change. So we just take the index delta and divide it by the total change in the index, and get these contributions to variation. And so, for instance, if we go back to our carcass weight example, in TPI, that move to the top 5% for carcass weight accounts for about 25% of the variation in the index. Okay. For feeder profit index, it's 34%. So you can look across there and see, again, hot carcass weight, marbling score, feed intake, calving ease are all big drivers in TPI. Mature weights in there as well. If you look at feeder profit index, then the green line above it, hot carcass weight, marbling score, and feed intake are the big drivers. Okay, so it's just a nice way to kind of look at this and see, is the index doing what we think as producers makes sense, right, from an economic standpoint, understanding the economic flow in these production systems. And we certainly think they do a very nice job of capturing that economic contribution. Okay, so we're going to shift gears for just a minute and real quickly provide you just a little bit of background on the 4 new traits that have been deployed this fall as well. Many of you are familiar with them, at least contextually. So we'll give a little bit of additional detail. First one's mature weight. It is now released on a monthly basis. So if you're in the mode of getting ready to wean calves, I'd encourage you, if you don't already collect body weight and body condition score on cows at weaning time, certainly please do that. That's very helpful information. The model uses records on cows aged 2 to 12. So repeated records are fine, actually encouraged, particularly if you can capture one on, say, a 2-year-old or 3-year-old cow, and then maybe a mature cow at 5, 6, 7, 8, somewhere in there. Kind of helps pin those points down in the model. Body condition scores treated as a fixed effect, basically used to adjust differences in body weight due to differences in body condition. Okay. It is a 3-trait model, so it uses mature weight, weaning weight, and post-weaning gain. So it leverages data out of both the culling information from weaning to post-weaning gain, but also the growth relationship. We know post-weaning gain and mature weight have a very strong genetic correlation. Okay. Here's the heritabilities. So mature weight at age 6 had the highest heritability of, if we look at each one of those age classifications, so 2-year-old, 3-year-old, 4-year-old, 5-year-old, clear to 12. Age 6 has the highest heritability. It's about 0.51. So this is a trait we can make very rapid directional change in body weights of cows. Has a strong genetic correlation with weaning weight and post-weaning gain of about 0.6. And you can see the heritability then of weaning weight and post-weaning gain are both quite a bit lower at 0.32 and 0.29 respectively. Okay. One of the other new numbers to kind of help contextualize cow weight, I get lots of questions from folks. Well, what's the right size cow? Well, right size cow really depends on a lot of things, and not the least of which is your production environment and nutrient availability. Um, but the selection index obviously helps take some of that into account. But providing context was also something that the IGS partnership thought was important for mature weight. And so they also express a new trait called cow energy requirement. Yearly. So this is cow energy requirement reported on an annual basis for a whole year production cycle. Um, and it is measured in TDN differences on a cow basis. So obviously, bigger cows or higher milk cows have a higher TDN requirement for maintenance than smaller or lower milk cows. And so this tool helps predict that. Okay. Here's the distribution of mature weight for Gelbvieh out of the IGS evaluation. So, there's some animals down here that are in the 20s and 30s. Breed average is somewhere kind of around 120-ish. And then certainly some animals that are up above 200 for mature weight. So if that spreads, just call it 200 pounds difference in genetic potential for mature weight is pretty substantial, and there's lots of opportunity to make selection. Here's the distribution of cow energy requirements. So it goes from about 2,300 pounds of TDN up to about 2,700. Okay. Dry matter intake. This number, many of you may have already been familiar with a little bit. We used a dry matter intake EPD calculated by Colorado State until just recently. IGS has been working on dry matter intake, a multi-breed, full genomic model for some time. Got released in a beta mode last spring, but now deployed here at AGA and a number of other partners. Released on a monthly basis as well. And it includes data from three principal sources, actual dry matter intake records, weaning weight records, and post-weaning gain. So like dry matter intake, we leverage the more frequently reported information, weaning weight and yearling weight, to help predict dry matter intake. But certainly, as you consider adding phenotypes to your selection system, I would encourage everybody to work on figuring out a way to collect more dry matter intake records. It's certainly a space we need more information. Here's the heritabilities. DMI is about 0.26. Weaning weight in this particular model about 0.4, so just a touch higher than the other model, and post-weaning gain about 0.33. Okay. DMI's genetic relationship with weaning weight and post-weaning gain, again, very strong and positive. So animals that are heavier at weaning weight have a heavier expected dry matter intake or higher expected dry matter intake. Same for post-weaning gain. Okay. Here's the plot of this was a select group of animals that Ryan Bolt had pulled out from high accuracy animals, and that correlation of these two traits for DMI, EPD, and yearling weight in the subset of animals was about 0.76. So a really strong and linear relationship there. Mature cow weight and cow energy requirement, context is important here for dry matter intake, right? And so I think oftentimes the industry puts forward this idea that we need to decrease dry matter intake as a trait, and I'm here to hopefully point you into a different path that says that maybe reducing dry matter intake is actually not the thing we need to do. What we actually need to do is improve efficiency. Okay. And what we find is that animals that maybe eat a little bit more, so they have a higher intake above maintenance requirement and do a better job of turning those calories into a saleable product, are actually the animals that we want to select for from a growing animal perspective to put through our feeding systems. And that actually is a very useful construct and way to think about efficiency and report it. And so the IGS team came up with an idea called dollar gain as a way to describe efficiency. And it's really the marginal value of gain is what gets reported. And so it's reported in dollars. And it's basically the value of gain less the cost to achieve that gain from a dry matter intake standpoint. So even though this equation says sum, the economic sign for the dollars there in front of DMI actually has a negative on it. So it's really the value of gain less the cost of gain to get there. So it does produce a value that describes this economic efficiency of gain, but also gets right at the heart of the importance of both improved feed intake, but most certainly improved average daily gain and performance as a way to capture value in our system. Dollar gains is the term that's been adopted across IGS to describe this particular subindex. It does get reported on a weekly basis now with the EPDs from IGS. Okay. Real quickly, here's just a couple of slides that describe the relationship between feed efficiency and dry matter intake, right? So FE actually gets better here a little bit as we increase DMI, and it's that overhead or dilution of maintenance effect. On the right then is feed efficiency EPD or dollar gain here and average daily gain. Okay. So positive relationship there. So I know that was really fast here on the new trait stuff, but I wanted to get through, make sure we had plenty of time for questions here at the end. Really appreciate the opportunity to work with board and staff to bring these new tools to your business and your partners, and look forward to an active dialogue here with some questions. Thanks, Sarah. Harold?
Bob, we have had one question pop up on the chat box, and that was fertility traits seem to be low on the MPI. Are we to recommend this trait for replacement heifers? And then DMI mature weight are still cheaper than open cows? That is a question also, or is the
Okay.
only. So
the first bit was about fertility, and I want to just go back here and look, get back to the slide here. For MPI, stability is actually big, right? And heifer pregnancy is relatively small. And there's an important reason for that. If we think about heifer pregnancy, what kinds of females typically excel at heifer preg? Big, fast growing ones, right? So ones that reach puberty earlier. Puberty's typically a weight attainment of a percentage of body weight and fatness to induce cyclicity in replacement heifers. And as Gelbvieh breeders, I would suggest that your problem with heifer pregnancy is not that heifers don't get pregnant, it's that heifers do get pregnant, right? And they get pregnant on cows before they get weaned. And because of that, so heifer preg in this particular population, not particularly important because you have a high fertility rate in the cattle to begin with. And heifer preg tends to be negatively associated with two important measures. One of those is heifer preg is positively associated with mature cow weight, right? So you have a tendency to have bigger yearling weights and bigger mature weights of these cows that have higher heifer preg, okay? But that's negatively associated with cost, right? Or has a negative influence on profit through increased cost. So heifer preg tends to get not weighted very heavy in many of the indexes that I've done over time because of that sort of invert of we think it's something that's important, but when you get to the end of the day, the genetic correlations, and if you're already at a high enough level of heifers reaching puberty, then it doesn't have any economic effect. Okay. And what effect it might have actually could be a little bit negative towards profitability. Stayability, on the other hand, is actually the measure that for a cow-calf producer is really, really important because it describes then the longevity and functional performance reproductively of these cows in the cow herd and decreases costs and increases revenue because we don't need as many replacement heifers. Okay. And in iGen-Deck, the only two fertility EPDs that are included in the modeling are heifer preg and stayability. Okay. Stayability at IGS, though, you guys published for quite a period of time preg 30. okay, which I think is an important construct, particularly in thinking about getting heifers rebred. Okay, that's what Preg 30 does. It's do my 2-year-olds get rebred? Okay, that's actually now already included in the stayability number at IGS, where old stayability didn't have that in it. Stayability revamp from about 2 or 3 years ago now is a model that says, did the heifer have a calf at 3, given she had one at 2, 4, given 3, da, 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 all the way out to, I think, age 12, right? So it's already capturing all that information early on about rebreeding of young cows into the stayability number. So I think fertility is appropriately represented in this index, and I think from a weighting standpoint, demonstrated here, still very, very important. Okay, that was the first question. Harold, what was the second one? Sorry, I got a short attention
Yeah.
span.
It was just a comment, maybe more than a question. Is DMI or mature weight cheaper than open cows?
Um, well, I would say yes, but to the extent of, in this model, mature weight is capturing on a fixed resource base the nutrient requirements of those cows and saying, what's the trade-off between feeding them, right? So mature weight here really is a proxy for maintenance energy requirement or pounds of TDO, however you want to think about it, but that's the energy to maintain and run that cow. Um, and yeah.
And then we have another set of questions that are kind of centered around the mature weight. Kind of what mature weight is considered optimum for the index, or in other words, are you rewarded for a larger mature weight or a smaller mature weight? And then so is a smaller number is a more moderate, more valuable than a bigger one in this index? And then so I'll let you answer that one first.
Yeah. So, and I'm trying to look here on my, I don't think I put the mature cow weight parameter in the um, slide deck. Let me look here and see what I actually put in the model. And this was taken directly out of the mature cow base weight was 1,301 pounds. Okay. And that was the average out of the Gelbvieh database on August 13th, 2025. Okay. So it's 13, let's call it 1,300 pounds. And the question of what is the right size is a bit tricky, right? Because in this case of the weaned calf index, right, mature weight soaks up a big chunk of the variation because of cost, okay, and differences in cost associated with those different body weights. Big cows that produce really high weight, weaning weight calves can look very favorable on the index. The thing that doesn't look favorable is if you have a big cow weight or mature weight EPD and low calf performance. Okay. Those cows get murdered. Okay. And rightfully so, right? Yeah, a 1,400-pound cow that weans off a 300-pound calf should get, she should work for McDonald's for a very short period of time, right? So the index then takes into account the trade-offs between calf productivity and the relationships of the traits to get calf weaning weight from weaning weight direct and milk EPD and her respective mature weight EPD. Okay, so it's taking that efficiency piece into account when it calculates the index. So there's a what we would call an ISO efficiency. So there's a line of cows that have equal value, right? Depending on their relationship between cow weight and calf productivity. Okay.
And to kind of just maybe clarify on the new mature weight EPD, in terms of percentile rank, can you address how they're ranked? So are the small ones ranked as they're the higher percentile rank, or are they
I
like
think it's
one
the other. I
percenters or
think the high. Let me just go look. Gelbvieh digital beef. I've looked this up at least 3 times and I can't remember for sure. So let me look. Percentile ranks. Drag this over here so y'all can see it. Mature weight, top 1% is its heaviest, right? So most of these growth ones are heavier is towards 1% and lighter is towards 99%. Okay, so breed average is in active sires is 126 pounds. Okay, and the 1% mark is 193, and the 95th percentile is 83. Okay.
And then there was also a question, do genomics affect the mature weight number? And do they also affect the energy requirement numbers?
Yes. So the mature weight evaluation uses genomics for mature weight, weaning weight, and post-weaning gain. Okay, so it's a full single step, just like all of our other traits, uses external EPDs, breed effects, heterosis, all the stuff. Okay, it is fully modern in that way. And then the cow energy requirement is basically a mathematical transformation of the mature weight EPD, milk EPD, and birth weight. Okay, so it uses the NRC equations to compute that energy requirement based on differences in those three EPDs. And so thereby, we could say the calving or the cow energy requirement is genomically enhanced to the extent that the three EPDs that go into it are genomically informed.
And then the last question, I'm going to paraphrase. So if I get this wrong, definitely jump in here and straighten me out. But if a breeder turns in weights on every cow every year, they'll likely be turning in weights on some donors that potentially haven't calved that might skew them a little bit. Does the system filter that at all?
Yeah, so it'll build contemporary groups of cows, and you have an opportunity to identify management codes with mature weights. So I would certainly encourage you to make sure that those donors or other cows that are managed in this, let's say you got maybe a cow calf pair you're fitting for a show. Probably need to take her out of that contemporary group because she wasn't under the same environmental conditions your regular, say 5-year-old cow would have been. So, yep.
And that exhausts the questions on the chat box so far. But if anyone would like to ask Bob some questions, I would certainly encourage you. You would have the floor.
There was one in here from earlier that I just want to get on the recording, just asking about when the MEVs will be updated, if it's annually or how often. And that's going to be every year, right, Bob?
Right. So the plan is to take and use this 10-year rolling average data. And so the economic parameters get updated every year to reflect the subtle changes in input output relationships and pricing that might happen on an annual basis. Yeah. And we've actually been monitoring that. So as I mentioned earlier, we've been at this for about 4 years. And so every year I go through the whole exercise of updating, in fact, sometimes several times a year, updating all this price data, just to see, kind of the sensitivity of the models to those changes. And they're very subtle. Even with some pretty, if we take, the fed cattle pricing or calf pricing stuff, 10% or $10 move on $200 calves is 5% move. It only moves the MEV just a tiny bit.
So another question just came up. So don't recommend MPI to commercial customers to increase fertility rates. It's built for smaller mature cow weights first and foremost.
I'm not sure I agree with that, right? So stability's in there, okay, and it's weighted appropriately for its contribution to profit, right? So cow longevity is important. If you go in and change the value of annual cow costs and make it substantially lower, um, cow stayability changes, the requirement for cow stayability changes to even a smaller percentage, right? So if you make cows really expensive and replacement heifers really expensive, stayability uh, continues to get more important. So I think, as an industry trend, if I was to make a bet, what's going to happen to the stayability, economic weight relevance or relative emphasis is probably going to get bigger because if we go in and put in the next 2 years of cow cost information, if you go into the K-State data, right, we say cow actual fixed costs or variable costs for cows is pushing $1,000 a cow. The model says that we use 600. Okay, and I've run it with 1,000. Stayability gets a lot more important. Okay, because it's extending the longevity of the cow. We're putting more replacement heifers into the revenue stream. So I think the MPI index. If you have a customer that sells calves at weaning time and keeps their own replacement heifers, MPI is absolutely the index to use.
Anyone have questions from the group?
Which one? While they're mulling on that, extend my answer a little bit. There was a assertion there that smaller cows win. That's not always true. Okay, if you go look in the index, if you've got a small cow that has large calf output or heavy weaning performance, she'll look very favorable on the index because she's producing lots of output relative to her input. If you have small cows that have small calves, they're not going to look very favorable. Okay, it's about the input output relationship, and that's why the index is powerful.
Okay, well, that was a lot of information to digest, and we certainly appreciate. We do have one more question that just popped up. What new EPD should seed stock producers be breeding for to meet the commercial customer needs?
That's a good question. I would actually just say do a better job measuring the phenotypes on the ones we're collecting, right? If you go look in the data, we do a pretty good job collecting calving E-scores and birth weights, an okay job collecting weaning weights. If you go look at the inventory of animals that have yearling weights collected, of course, they go down a lot, partially because we sell some of them at weaning time, right? But if you've got replacement heifers in your herd that don't have a yearling weight required, there's an opportunity. Okay, mature cow weights. The whole IGS evaluation needs more mature cow weights. Gelbvieh and Limousin actually are two of the breeds that have done a better job than average in collecting mature weights. But if you go look at the number of cows you've got on inventory versus the number of cow weights that you get recorded as an organization each year, it's a pittance. Okay, we need to do a lot better job. If we think cows are important maternally and part of our business and marketing model, we have absolutely got to get our arms around mature cow weight to control cost. Okay, we can't just keep selecting for 130 yearling weight and not put some down pressure on cow size because the data says cows get bigger every year.
And certainly a chance for us to plug our Cow Power program that kind of helps you ameliorate some of those costs a little bit.
Oh yeah, great point, Harold. Yep. Yeah. If you help, you're motivated to collect that economically by reducing cost of genotyping, right? The genotyping bit also helps your predictive capacity as a breeder. But let's do a better job collecting the phenotypes we already got going.
And then one more, if you don't have feed efficiency or mature weights on your cow herd, what what does IGS plug in there for a cow herd that doesn't have that information?
Well, if you don't, so that's the value of the multi-trait model, right? So if you don't have mature cow weights reported, it uses the weaning weight and post-weaning gain EPD to predict mature weight. So the answer you get for your cows is a function of the genetic relationship between those three traits. And you will be exactly in the middle of that. And so I frequently hear, well, my cows aren't that big. Well, you don't have any data in the database to prove differently. We're going to fit what the average is. And so another good reason to collect data, so you know, right? You can't manage what you don't measure. For dry matter intake, same strategy, right? We know dry matter intake is reported at much lower frequency than weaning weight and post-weaning gain. In fact, across IGS and certainly within Gelbvieh, very good data density in weaning weight and post-weaning gain. The relationships there are very, very strong between, the old feedlot adage of intake drives gain is true phenotypically and is true genetically, right? You can't have really high output animals without a certain amount of input. And so finding our ability to measure that is important, but we can also do a very good job predicting it based on those genetic correlations between traits. And one of the advantages actually of going in using the IGS evaluation is because we include weaning weight and post-weaning gain in the evaluation, every animal gets a dry matter intake EPD estimate out the back end of the evaluation. Same for mature weight.
One comment was made that Gelbvieh is one of only 4 breeds that offers mature weight and makes that public and available that you can see it. And that is one comment I would share. And I hope that we have been extremely transparent with how these indexes have been developed. And there's tons of information on Digital Beef where you can find out the calculations and all of those things. And I feel like that's extremely important, that, a lot of times these indexes in the past have maybe been a little bit of a black box. Nobody knows what made them, but
some of them
these
are
are
a lot of a black box.
Yeah, but these are pretty much out there. You can study and see. I'm a little confused by this. Can you see that question, Bob, in the chat?
Get that chat here going.
It's just asking why we rank the biggest cows as the 1%ers versus the little cows as 99.
Oh, it's principally a function of that's the way we do the other weight traits as well, right? So we put weaning weight, the heaviest one, yearling weight, the heaviest one, heaviest birth weights are in the upper percentile rank. So it's easier just to have them all go in the same direction, where heavier is further up in the percentile table. It doesn't imply good or bad. Okay.
And I think that's maybe one of the risks of being transparent, is you need to be careful and really study those particular EPDs and the percentile ranks before you dive all the way in. Kind of know what you're getting. Other questions at this point? Yeah, and that comment was made. The other 3 breeds don't rank them in the same way that we do. So it's always good to study and know kind of how they are ranked before you dive in. So as with anything, a lot of study helps. And I think this webinar is proof that our breeders are interested. And I do, again, appreciate everybody jumping on here to learn more about these. I think it'll be a bit of a learning curve as we all become comfortable with them and learn how they're built and understand it better. But I think this is a great first step, and appreciate everyone being on here. Appreciate Dr. Weber for presenting this to us and answering questions. And I know he'll be available as will Sarah and I. If you have questions as you go along, as you study your herd with these new indexes, we'd be happy to answer the questions, and don't be surprised if Sarah and I say we don't know the answer, but we will send it to Bob and
Yep.
try to figure out the right answer, because we want to make sure everybody understands these and is able to present them to your commercial customers accurately and help them make the best decision. But again, it's a measurement tool to compare animals. So.
Yep, super. Thanks, Harold. And I just want to do a quick shout out. I see Ryan Betzelberger. I haven't seen Ryan for a while in person, but goes way back to my staff time back in the 90s, as well as Wayne Roich is way down the list. I was just scrolling through. Wayne, thanks for joining. I haven't seen you in a while either, but think about you periodically, and hope we can catch up sometime.
Well, again, thank you everyone for joining. Thanks, Dr. Weber, for presenting to us, and we'll look forward to, as you study these, as you have more questions, again, please feel free to reach out to us. We'll do our best to answer the questions. But again, thanks for joining our webinar this evening, and we'll look forward to continuing progress on the 3 new indexes.
Thanks all.
Thanks, everyone.